To our breaking news this hour, the US state of Maine has removed former US President Donald Trump from their primary ballot in the 2024 election. Well, joining me live now from the United States is our Sky News US analyst, Michael Ware. Michael, thanks so much for joining us at late notice. What's your reaction to the Maine decision?
It's surprising and it's not surprising. This is actually an issue in at least 24 states. Does former President Trump qualify for an election to public office when some states consider, under the 14th Amendment's third section, that he engaged in insurrection or supported those who engaged in insurrection? Now, Maine is a quirk. Under their state law, you don't have to go to the courts to get someone excluded from the ballot. Voters can petition the Secretary of State, or what back home we would call that, say, an Attorney General. Now, and that's what happened in Maine. A group of voters went to the Secretary of State and said this man was engaged in insurrection and shouldn't be allowed on the ballot. Now, the Secretary of State in Maine happens to be a Democrat. And Sheena Bellows has decided that former President Trump is not qualified to run for public office because he betrayed the oath of office he took when he became president. Look, you can easily see this as a partisan decision because it's a very arbitrary move from someone from the other party. But there are, like I said, dozens of states that have this very issue moving through the courts. So what this really, truly highlights is that this is the SCOTUS presidential election, the Supreme Court of the United States presidential election. There are a number of issues the Supreme Court is going to be forced to decide before the election. Meanwhile, President Trump's legal team are trying to delay so that the Supreme Court does not get that chance before November. But this is a much broader issue than Maine. Absolutely. And that's a very Trumpian legal strategy. He did that when he was in the corporate world. He's done that in the political world. Maine, it has to be said, is out there on its own because this does not require the courts. But already we're seeing Colorado, where the Supreme Court in Colorado said that former president had engaged in insurrection and so therefore couldn't be on the ballot. And that decision is already being appealed by the Republican Party in Colorado. But we also know that they've also kicked that ball down the road, that can down the road in Colorado, because they said, look, we'll suspend this decision to exclude former President Trump until the general election. Look, there's several key issues that have to go to the highest court in the land before this election campaign, and President Trump's only interest is making sure those issues don't go before the bench.
Michael, I want to bring to our viewers, we were talking there about the Secretary of State in Maine, Democrat, as you point out, Sheena Bellows. This is part of how she's come to the decision. This is her quote. She says, "I don't reach this conclusion lightly." She says, "Democracy is sacred. I'm mindful that no Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I'm also mindful, however, that no presidential candidate has ever before engaged in insurrection." Now, this decision can be appealed to a state court, and you can imagine Trump's team will be doing everything they can in terms of the legal avenues. But talk to us about the impact of Maine as a state. Ultimately, it doesn't have that many electoral votes, does it? It's one of those, you could hardly say, the reddest of red states in America, is it?
No, it's not. It's a small state. It doesn't have that many electoral college votes. I don't see it being one of the 5 or 6 states that will actually turn this election. But it's the danger of the symbolism and how that may ripple out and how that may energize pro-Trump supporters and anti-Trump activists. So there are broader ramifications. And like I said, you can easily peg this as a partisan decision by a Democratic Secretary of State. But what it does is it, for the second time in about a week or less, it has brought to the fore that there are serious legal issues hanging over and threatening to drown former President Trump's nomination, even for the GOP primary, let alone the general election.